All right, we're about to dive into the ideas of a thinker who was so influential, you're probably using his concepts every single day and you don't even know it. His name is John Locke, and you could absolutely make the case that he's the architect of modern liberty itself. Let's get into it. So let me start by asking you a really basic question. Is your mind a blank slate when you're born? Do we come into the world with certain ideas already, pre-installed? Or is everything we know built piece by piece from our experiences? How you answer that? Well, it lands you right in the middle of a huge debate that John Locke was dead set on solving. You've got to remember, Locke was writing back in the 17th century, and it was a time of just immense chaos. People were wrestling with these massive crises. How do we actually know anything for sure? Who gets to tell us what to do? And how can we stop fighting and killing each other over religion? Locke stepped right into that mess and offered answers for all three. So first up is that crisis of knowledge. How does our mind get filled with all the stuff that's in there? From knowing what a dog is to understanding gravity. At the time, there were basically two big competing camps. On one side, you had the rationalists, like René Descartes. They believed knowledge came from pure reason, kind of like math, right? The idea is we're born with these core truths, and then we just use logic to build everything else. But on the other side, you had Locke and the empiricists. And he basically said, nope, all knowledge comes from one place, and one place only, our experience of the world through our senses. And this brings us to one of his most famous ideas, the tabula rasa, which is Latin for blank slate. Locke's theory was that when we're born, our mind is totally empty, a blank page. Every single idea, from the color blue to complex physics, is built from the information we get through seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, and smelling. Our minds, according to Locke, can't just invent new ideas from scratch. They can only work with the data our senses give them. Okay, but this brings up a huge problem, one that skeptics just love to bring up. Our senses can be wrong, right? I mean, think about optical illusions or dreams. So if our only source of information can be faulty, how can we possibly trust that we know anything about the real world at all? Locke's solution here is honestly just brilliant. He says, okay, let's split an object's properties into two types. First, you've got primary qualities. These are the things that are really part of an object, no matter what. Its size, its shape, its weight. So for an apple, its roundness and its mass are primary qualities. They're objective. But then you have secondary qualities, things like color, taste, and smell. Locke argued these aren't in the apple itself. The redness of the apple is just how our brain processes light bouncing off its skin. It's a subjective experience. So while my red might be slightly different than your red, we can both agree on the objective facts, the primary qualities of the apple. And that's how we can build a reliable picture of reality. Now, this whole idea that we build our knowledge from the ground up has some huge implications. I mean, if we aren't born with innate ideas about the world, are we born with innate ideas about who's supposed to rule over us? And this brings us right to Locke's second great challenge, the crisis of power. The burning question of the day was, where does a king's authority actually come from? The main theory everyone was running with, pushed by guys like Sir Robert Filmer, was the divine right of kings. The argument basically went like this. God gave Adam total power over his kids. That power got passed down from father to son for generations, and ta-da, it eventually landed with the current king. So the king's power was absolute, it was God-given, and you couldn't question it. Your job was simply to obey. Locke just completely demolishes this argument. In his famous Second Treatise of Government, he starts from this totally different place he calls the state of nature. He says, okay, let's rewind. Before any governments existed. In that state, all people are perfectly free and totally equal. Nobody has a natural right to be the boss of anyone else. We're all governed by a law of nature, which is basically a set of moral rules that any rational person can figure out. And the most important rule of all, nobody should harm another person's life, health, liberty, or property. And this leads us directly to Locke's most revolutionary conclusion. If we all start as equals, then the only way a government can have any legitimate power over us is if we give it our consent. Power flows up from the people, not down from God. It's a simple idea, but it's the absolute bedrock of modern democracy. It changed everything. So finally, Locke turns his incredible mind to the crisis of faith. Remember, the 17th century was just torn apart by religious wars and persecution. Locke needed to find a way to make the violence stop. And it's really hard to overstate just how bad things were. This wasn't just one group picking on another. Intolerance was everywhere. Protestants persecuted Catholics,
Catholics persecuted Protestants, and different kinds of Protestants persecuted each other. Violence in the name of God was just a normal part of life.
So Locke's approach to this problem wasn't emotional. It was based on cold, hard logic. In his A Letter Concerning Toleration, he lays out these 3 knockout arguments against all this persecution. First, he says, saving souls is simply not the government's job. Second, you can't force someone to truly believe something anyway. Real faith has to be genuine. And third, even if you could force them, it wouldn't work because true salvation requires a free choice. To really make his case, he draws this super sharp line in the sand. The state, or the Commonwealth as he called it, has one job and one job only: to protect our civil interests. And what does that mean? Our life, our liberty, our health, and our property. That's it. Notice what's missing from that list: the salvation of your soul. The church, on the other hand, is a completely different kind of organization. It's a free and voluntary group that people choose to join because they hope it will lead to salvation. Its business is a private, inward matter of the soul. And because belief is an internal state of mind, it can't be forced by outward force, like the police or an army. The conclusion is just inescapable. The government and the church have totally different goals, so they need to operate in separate spheres. They have to stay in their own lanes. The state takes care of our earthly business, while the church takes care of our spiritual business. And just like that, Locke gives us the blueprint for the separation of church and state, a principle that is now fundamental to so many societies around the world. So, after tackling knowledge, power, and faith, what's the lasting impact of all these revolutionary ideas? Where do we see Locke today? Well, you can draw a straight line from Locke's writings in 1689 to the world we live in right now. His ideas on natural rights and government by consent were the intellectual fuel for the American Revolution in 1776. I mean, Thomas Jefferson practically had Locke's book open when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And today, these very principles are the foundation, the very bedrock of countless democracies all across the globe. You know, this single sentence really gets to the moral heart of his entire philosophy. It's so simple, but it's incredibly profound. It's a declaration that every single person has value and deserves to be treated with freedom and respect. And that was an idea that absolutely changed the world. So at the end of the day, Locke gave us the blueprint for a free society, a mind that's open to evidence, a government that serves its people, and the freedom to believe whatever we choose. He laid this all out over 300 years ago. So the final question, really, is for us. Are we still honoring that foundation today?